Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Doge Watch. I'm your host, Nick Freitas, where if you give us just a little bit of your time, we will give you all of the highlights that Doge has been working on for the past week, plus give you some important insight on why it matters and some of the effects that it could potentially have. Today, we're going to dive into a pretty important question, and that is, what is the public perception of Doge? Because the polls are in, and they reveal some very interesting facts. The first thing that we're going to jump into right here has to do with kind of the polling in general. So this post by Libs of TikTok came out on X, and it said, this new poll is absolutely devastating to the Democrats. Doge is extremely popular by huge margins. Now, I want to say something real quick here, because when you look at this poll that was put out by Harvard Caps Harris, it doesn't actually specifically mention Doge, and that's important because it's one thing to poll the various work and the accomplishments that Doge is having, but the question is, do people associate the things that they want to happen with what Doge is doing? And so we're gonna dig into that a little bit more. But I want to talk to you about some of the questions here because this does provide some really important insight. So 2 in 3 voters say the federal government's debt is unsustainable, and over 4 in 5 say they should work to balance the budget. Now, again, this is something that kind of the American people have always said in general. The question has always been, how dedicated are they to the specific things that need to be done in order to achieve that? Because it's easy to say, I want a balanced budget, until all of a sudden somebody starts cutting the things that you like in order to balance the budget. But at least in principle, people are happy with some of the work that Doge is doing. The question is whether or not they associate Doge's work with that outcome. Another question was, an overwhelming majority of voters say the government should reduce government expenses over increasing taxes, and a full examination of expenditures is needed. Again, I think this is good news, but I think it's the sort of thing that you would naturally expect people to say within a poll. They all have different ideas, though, on what it actually looks like. Let's look at the next couple of questions here. This one said 7 in 10 voters think government expenditures are filled with waste and agree with cutting $1 trillion in expenses. Okay, now this is a little bit more specific and something that you can more directly tie to Doge. A couple things I'll say here, though. Elon Musk's goal originally was $2 trillion, right? Now, again, when you say, can you cut $1 trillion in expenses, you can probably find a lot of people that think, well, of course the government should be able to do that because of all the fraud, waste, and abuse. I think the thing that is more specific in here, and that is helpful to Doge's overall operations is the fact where they say that 7 in 10 voters think government expenditures are filled with waste, right? That's important. This is the part where we get into something that is more Doge specific. This next question. Most voters agree with having a government agency dedicated to efficiency and that the Doge is helping to make major cuts. And specifically, there's a question here that says, do you think the so-called Department of Government Efficiency led by Elon Musk is helping make major cuts in government expenditures or not? 60% said that it is making major cuts. Now, the question before that was, do you think there should be a U.S. government agency focused on efficiency initiatives or not? 72% said that. So here's the part where it gets good news for Doge, right? 72% of people said, yes, there should be such an agency focused on that particular task. And 60% equated Doge or said that they believe Doge was actually achieving that end state. That is, anytime you get 60% of Americans to agree on anything, that is overwhelming public support. So this is very good news for Doge with what we might consider to be the general population. Now, I want to go to the next polling that was done, and this is really important. This actually comes from a CNN report. We're on X here looking at it. It goes, the American people are angry, and they are rising up. Polls show Musk/Doge is hurting Trump more than helping, right? So this was Trump opponents say Musk and Doge cuts are the top worst thing he's done so far. Twice as many Democrats than GOP list Musk and Doge as the top action Trump has taken. Now, here's what's so interesting about this, because these are the worst things Trump has done according to people who already oppose Donald Trump. So just keep in mind, they already don't like Trump. They already don't like Elon Musk. But now it's analysis of, out of all the things that Trump has done so far, what do they hate the worst? Here's what is just fascinating. If you were to say before Trump took office, if you were to ask yourself, what do you think is going to be the thing that Democrats are most upset with Donald Trump about? Right? Maybe it's foreign policy. Maybe, I don't know, it's something having to do with abortion, even though he said he wasn't going to do anything about abortion. I would have guessed it would have been immigration policy. right? It would have been this idea that Trump is like going through and rounding up people and innocent civilians, innocent citizens are getting caught up in the mix. And this is all just an attack on brown people or people that don't look like Donald Trump. That's been the single worst thing he's done. It's the deportations. It's the rounding people up. It's the not allowing asylum seekers to come into the country. But when you compare it among those who oppose Trump, 10% says his immigration policy is the worst thing he's done. 24% say it's Doge. It's Doge and the funding freezes. So more than double the people who oppose Trump think that Doge is the worst possible thing that he's done. I think this is incredibly instructive because here's the thing you got to ask yourself. If 70% of the country, 72% actually, believes that we should have a dedicated agency that is seeking out efficiencies, then you would at least think, okay, Doge is trying to do that, right? 60% of the people polled agreed. And by the way, Donald Trump's not the first person to suggest that there needed to be some sort of committee or agency dedicated to this. Jimmy Carter had proposed one. Barack Obama had proposed one. The difference is that Trump is actually doing something substantive with Elon Musk. So here's the question. Why would this be the number one thing that Donald Trump opponents are mad about? Why would it be this? And this is the part where we go into understanding that when we talk about things like the deep state, right? This is not some like wild conspiracy theory, right? This is how bureaucracies have tended to operate, and there's a reason for that. Now, I want to point to this next tweet, and this actually comes from Politico, and you see the way that they organize. Now, remember, Politico was actually receiving a lot of money from the government because government agencies were getting subscriptions for Politico. And I mean, it was quite a bit. It was not a small number of, it was like millions of dollars were going to Politico from the federal government in order to make sure that all these federal agencies had to have Politico subscriptions. But you look at this tweet or this X post that Politico put out. It says, Trump signs order to claim power over independent agencies. Now, this is the part where, again, people start to ask some questions. Independent agencies, what does that mean exactly? I thought there were only 3 branches of government. And this is part of the problem, right? You look at the narrative and it becomes painfully obvious that what's going on here is that there has been a massive expansion of the bureaucratic state. And there's this notion that executive branch agencies, whether it be the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, or the Department of Justice, or all these other agencies like USAID, these aren't partisan organizations. These are just public servants. These are politically neutral organizations that are just necessary and required for carrying out the legitimate functions of the federal government. But is that really true? Well, what Doge is actually revealing to all of us right now is that narrative needs to be dead because it's not a reflection of reality. For instance, look at this right here from the Department of Education. So this comes right off of the Department of Government Efficiency X page. The Department of Education has terminated 18 grants for $226 million to comprehensive centers, which provided consulting services with a large focus on DEI. One center application stated, embedding DEI reviews across all deliverables and materials ensures it is not a one-off task, specific activity. A 2019 study, which itself cost $8 million, was not able to measure the casual impact of the center's work. So they gave $226 million for various, projects around these comprehensive centers, and then a study couldn't actually measure what they were actually doing. Another one, update. Lee Zeldin says, I just canceled another 21 wasteful DEI and environmental justice grants with the help of our amazing Doge team, racking up $67 million more in savings. Live update from Doge USDA team's meeting tonight. Look what we just found and canceled. $324,671 grant for increasing DEIA programming for integrated pest management. Now, look, maybe you're a fan of DEI, but can someone please tell me why we had a $300,000 grant for integrated pest management, DEI and integrated pest management? These are the sort of things when you look at it and you realize this was not about achieving legitimate functions of government. This was about using the power of the federal government to achieve political objectives, ideologically driven objectives. And we're not even talking about things that we would chalk up to typical partisan politics. This is about creating a bureaucracy which does the left's bidding regardless of who gets elected. Because this gets so embedded within the middle management, within the various websites they put out, with the various grants that they award, that now all of a sudden you've got billions of dollars going out to these agencies to ostensibly provide legitimate functions of government, but instead are diverted to left-wing organizations to carry out training, to carry out various projects, which are exclusively focused on doing things like DEI projects. It shouldn't shock any of us when Doge starts to uncover all of the massive amount of money that was going to fund left-wing ideology and using your tax dollars in order to do it. We shouldn't be surprised why the left instantly recognizes this as the greatest threat to their power. In fact, so much so that we see this tweeted from Matt O'Brien. Elon is a power-hungry fascist who is an absolute moron about things outside of his domain knowledge. That's why his wealth makes him such a threat to our democracy and the world. He and his Doge minions are breaking the law on a daily basis. There have to be consequences for that. I think most of us would have expected that the left would be furious over deportations, would be furious over actually enforcing the border. But the reason why they are so much more upset about what's going on right now is that the left absolutely needs these programs. They absolutely need your tax dollars in order to fund their ideology. They need the bureaucracy to stay in place, to be powerful and well-funded, not simply because it provides jobs to their buddies, but it's the way that they maintain their grip on power regardless of how the electorate votes. And this is where we get into things like the long march through the institutions. Now, we've talked about this before when we've talked about Antonio Gramsci, and he talked about cultural Marxism. He talked about this idea that if you actually wanted left-wing ideology to take hold in a predominantly capitalist country, well, then what you actually needed was to not simply do a violent revolution. What you actually needed was to take over culturally shaping institutions, and then you needed to shift the culture in favor toward Marxist ideology or toward just general left-wing ideology. And you saw this with Antonio Gramsci. You saw this with what became known as the Long March through the institutions, which was coined by Rudi Dutschke, who was a German activist. This is what has been going on. This is what has been going on within our bureaucracy with your tax dollars. At some point, as much as I hate what's going on, you've got to be impressed by the size of what they were able to pull off by using yours and my tax dollars to push their ideology. And the reason why they're so terrified of Doge right now is because of things like this. So we're going to go to this AP article. One of the things that Donald Trump has done is he's interpreted Schedule F in a way that gives him far more authority to hire and fire people within the federal bureaucracy. Because as we've discussed before, civil service laws provide a great deal of protection for anybody that is not considered a federal employee engaging in policy positions. And this was set up in order to prevent a new president coming in and just basically wiping out the executive branch and replacing it with his buddies that helped him get elected, right? That was ostensibly the reason why we had these civil service protections. But it's increasingly been used to the left to be able to control elements within the executive branch, regardless of who's in power. But when Donald Trump got in, one of the first things he did, which I think was a brilliant move, was he actually applied Schedule F based off of what's written in there, which is to say that it gives the executive branch, it gives the president a great deal of authority in defining what a policy-related position is. The other thing that he did that was brilliant is he did something called deferred resignations. So the White House offered a deferred resignation proposal in exchange for financial incentives, like months of paid leaves to almost all federal employees who opted to leave their jobs by February 6th. But just before that deadline, a federal judge blocked Trump's plan, wanting to hear arguments from the administration and the labor unions, which said the offer was illegal. According to the Office of Personnel Management, about 75,000 federal employees had accepted the offer by February 12th. They also had the probationary employee layoffs. There have also been wide-ranging layoffs of probationary employees, those generally on the job for less than a year and who have yet to gain civil service protection. Potentially hundreds of thousands are affected. On February 13th, the administration ordered agencies to lay off nearly all such workers. According to government data maintained by OPM, 220,000 federal employees less than a year on the job as of March 2024. So what Trump has done and what Doge has done is they've isolated all the various ways that executive branch agencies had essentially been co-opted by left-wing ideology. They demonstrated how absurd the spending was and how absurd the spending priorities were. They demonstrated how absurd some of these grants were that were going out to these kind of bogus 501c3s that were essentially collecting as much as 60%, if not more, in overhead and administrative costs. This is how you get to a situation where billions of dollars can be allocated to help starving people in Africa or Haiti or somewhere else in the world, and then finding a significant amount of that money going into the pockets of incredibly well-connected leftists and political donors to the Democratic Party. By exposing all that, they demonstrated the absurdity of it, and now they're using all of the powers within the executive branch through the redefining of Schedule F, through offering deferred resignations, to be able to significantly reduce the bureaucratic state. And the left is terrified because they know exactly what it means. And what they've indicated to us is something that is very important, and this is the part you need to listen to. Leftist ideology cannot compete in the United States without first confiscating your tax dollars and infiltrating and taking over executive branch agencies, which are supposed to be politically or at least partisanly neutral, and instead co-opting them to carry out their agenda regardless of who's in power. Doge is the biggest threat to that apparatus, and that is why they recognize it as the biggest threat to their power. Hope you enjoyed this update for Doge. Again, we think this is some of the most important work that's going to be happening over the next 2 years. Needs to be done right, needs to be done effectively, but it needs to be done. Once again, thank you for watching Doge Watch, and we'll see you next episode.